Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion on Air podcast. This podcast is a program of the Association of American Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters Initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Lisa Greenhill, and I'm the Associate Executive Director for Institutional Research and Diversity at the AAVMC. I am very, very excited about today's show. This is the first of a two-part series on holistic admissions. And so today I welcome Ms. Kim DeBrew to the show. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi. Ms. DeBrew currently serves as the Senior Vice President for Access, Diversity, and Inclusion at the American Dental Education Association. Among her many duties at ADEA, she works with a program focusing on incorporating holistic review practices across the nation's dental schools. I've had the pleasure of working with Kim over the years, most recently jointly presenting workshops at a few AAVMC member institutions specifically on this topic. So today, Kim will discuss the ADIA Holistic Review Program and its impact on admissions and diversity in dental education. And she'll talk a bit about how some of our veterinary schools might move closer towards becoming more holistic admission review institutions. So Kim, welcome to the show.
Lisa, it is a pleasure to join you.
Yes, wonderful. We're so glad that you joined us. So why don't you tell us a little bit about ADIA? It's really kind of one of our sister organizations, if you will.
Sure. So ADIA is the membership organization for predoctoral dental education, allied dental education, and advanced dental education. So we like to say that we are the voice of dental education, with 66 U.S. dental schools, about 10 Canadian schools, and several hundred allied programs and advanced education programs. We have about 20,000 members. So what I would say about this work is it is always a pleasure to collaborate across K Street, across Washington with our sister brother organizations. It's been really great to, in some ways, go on the stump with AAVMC and with our colleagues in nursing and in pharmacy. And this topic, holistic review, has really resonates. It's a common thread through all of our work.
Absolutely, and I'm really excited because as many of the folks in the veterinary community know, AAVMC is moving locations, and so we'll be at 655 K Street, and I believe your office will be downstairs from ours? Or
yeah, so we're on 8.
Yeah, so actually you'll be upstairs, I think, because we're going to be on, I believe, 7. So, okay. So we will be building mates, making our collaborations that much easier. We can meet at the cafe.
Yes, looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So, how did ADIA get involved in this issue around holistic review? What prompted the work that you're doing?
Sure. So I'll go back to 2001. I was heavily involved in leading a national grant-making effort that focused on health equity. Our goals were to ensure that the dental education curriculum included more social and behavioral sciences, and that students rotated out into community settings in a more robust way. The third goal of the program was to do something about the diversity of the profession. Certainly dentistry, as other health professions know, it really is trying to grow the numbers, is to grow the recruitment, retention efforts. So what we were seeing in the program early on is that the efforts we were putting into place and encouraging our schools to engage in resulted in increased applications. So for the 15 schools that had these Robert Wood Johnson Foundation grants, their applicants went up. So we thought this is a great thing. But what was plateauing was students that were inviting for interviews and that were offered acceptances. And we tried to unpack what was going on within the schools, and we learned that the admissions process was a barrier in many cases. So we kind of enlisted the content experts in our field to try to figure out how we might ensure that the processes that were taking place on the ground were a little bit more robust and took into consideration a broader number of criteria instead of just looking at kind of the numbers, the traditional numbers metrics, which in our case are DAT scores and undergraduate GPAs in science and overall GPA. Our colleagues in medicine had already invested heavily in this work. They talked at length about an acronym known as EAM, which is a balanced review of a candidate's experiences, attributes, and metrics, those being considered in balance with one another and really based in the mission of the institution. So we worked with AAMC. We said, okay, tell us about the template that you use to talk to your schools about this work. And what we turned that into was a formal training program. We enlisted 10 members of our admissions community, admissions and student affairs community, to participate in a training program. Robert Wood Johnson ultimately funded that program in 2006. And we thought the power of that model was that we were engaging peer educators and peer admissions practitioners in the work. What they did was they had a standard template that talked about, how committees are formed around mission. We talked about training the admissions committee members. We talked about review of non-cognitive variables, looked at some of the best practices around that, developed by scholars such as William Sedlicek. We talked about the legal ramifications of race-conscious admissions and some of the legal cases that had preceded this work. And what to our wonder and surprise, there was great buy-in to this model. We have now conducted about 30 workshops at 66 of our dental schools to date. And we've now engaged a second round of trainers in these activities. And I think this probably has exceeded our wildest expectations. We participated in a national study of health professions in 2014. And this was a funded project by an organization called Urban Universities for Health, which is a kind of consortium of the AAMC, the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. And they wanted to look at holistic admissions practices across health professions. And guess what? Dentistry was number one. 93% of our institutions reported significant holistic review practices. So we were excited about that.
That's great. That's really, really great. So before my next question, we have a lot of viewers watching live today. If you have a question, please don't hesitate to drop that in the event page or on the YouTube page. Our wonderful producer, William Willis, is behind the scenes, and he will make sure that we get those questions. So please do drop the questions online. So Kim, can you explain exactly what holistic admissions is? What is it? What does it mean? And what isn't it? What it's not?
So I want to start with what it's not. What it's not is it's not an opportunity to lower the standards of an institution. I think that's a commonly held myth, that it is a tool, one tool of many, to help a school reach its diversity and inclusion goals and reach its goals in general. And really that's the point that I want to underscore. It's a flexible way to accomplish your admissions goals. When I said a minute or so ago that it's mission driven, what that means is It's your aspirations about who you are and who you want to be as an institution, why you exist. I think many institutions probably could say by rote what their triple aim is. It's to, have a robust research agenda. It is to educate students in the highest quality that they can. It is to conduct high quality research and provide high quality patient, or in the case of veterinary medicine, animal care. And I think it's equally important for institutions and for admissions committees, frankly, to develop their own mission statements that really reflect an alignment with what the school overall is trying to do. For example, if there's a state school that has a mission around meeting the needs of that state, I think an admissions committee certainly has to take that into consideration. If a school wants to recruit rural students, then that is critically important to take into consideration. So I think my key about the holistic approach is really it allows for a lot of flexibility steeped in a deep commitment to mission. And the way that schools achieve that is what I said earlier. It's looking equally at the experiences and the attributes and the metrics, so that the non-cognitive and the cognitive variables in balance with one another.
Number one out of those, your school one out of those that were reviewed in that review you mentioned earlier. So what has the impact been for, I guess, structural diversity in dental education as more of your schools have moved to more holistic evaluations of applicants?
Well, one of the positive things that I think has happened to sort of support this work is that in 2013, our accreditation standards were revised to include a more robust language around diversity. And so now we talk about compositional diversity in addition to two other measures of diversity, which are curricular diversity and climate and the interactional diversity. So I think that these two kind of sets of policies kind of going into play at the same time really have been complementary. So as schools are developing new strategies and tools to admit the class they want, then they also have to be prepared to meet the needs of the class they want, both in the curriculum and in the climate. And I think actually having a climate and a focus on climate actually helps you say, look, here's what we found out about the students that do well in our school. Here's how we support them. And therefore we can try to recruit the class that will do well in the environment that we have or the environment that we're trying to create. So I would say very, very positive results. In the study that I cited earlier, of those admissions outcomes, the admissions outcomes that were reported, 76% of the dental schools in that study said that their diversity of their incoming class had increased. 88% of the schools said that they reported an average GPA that was unchanged or increased. 100% of the schools reported graduation rates that were unchanged or increased. And 84% of dental schools reported the average number of attempts for passing our licensure exam were unchanged or improved. So very, very positive self-reports from the schools that participated in that study.
Sure, sure. I mean, I think that the data that you've just cited is really compelling and really gets at that argument that we do hear often in terms of thinking about diversity conscious admissions practices and policies really do not ever need to consider a lowering of standards. I mean, it really is it really is a myth, if you will.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that what's called upon is kind of our best creative selves in this work. If you start with what the class is that you want to build as a starting point, almost a visual about what that class might look like, what characteristics and qualities you value as an institution. If you start with the end in mind, then you're destined for success. And yes, it is more time intensive and labor intensive and resource intensive because it requires a lot of looks at applications and a structure that supports that review. But I think if the will is there, we can definitely talk about the way and the way to get there.
Some of the technical pieces of like how do schools go about doing this. Can you talk a little bit about the mission piece? So
Sure.
just as I guess a preview for next week's show, one of our institutions, Virginia, Maryland, that will be on talking about some of the things that they've done over the last couple of years. They actually, I believe it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, changed the mission of the college to explicitly include the word diversity. And as a result of that, they found that they were able to really justify doing some novel things at that institution with respect to recruiting, as well as taking a hard look at what they're doing specifically within the review process. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the mission driven activity and, as your schools move towards this, have they had to be review their missions and be more explicit and make changes as this thing evolves?
Yeah, I think most of the schools that have been able to make the most progress started there. Inevitably, the mission that an individual unit, so if that's the veterinary medical school or the medical school, the dental school, the nursing school, they all have to align with overall institutional mission. So that's the starting point. But within that, there are definitely unit goals that are critically important. If, for example, I think I talked to one of your institutions when we visited out at UC Davis, and I remember that that school is, I don't remember, you may recall what kind of provider they're trying to train. Do they want researchers as the primary?
Folks that were really interested in public health, preventative health.
Preventative health.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So okay, let's start with that as a frame. That's a school that really might want to first hold up. Okay, public health is our frame. All right, what are the population kinds of health issues that we want to address? And who are the providers that we want to look at that? Are they California residents? If it's a California school, what are the facets of that kind of preparation that we want to take into consideration? What's the volunteerism look like? What's the work experience look like? And with a view towards diversity, how might a diverse candidate be presenting in that environment? So for example, if you value shadowing or volunteerism or work experience that's related to public health, might a student from a disadvantaged background that's had to work be disadvantaged by that, right? They can't do the number of hours or the types of experiences that you might want. So your mission statement might reflect that. It might need to be tweaked a little bit to talk about the breadth of the kinds of candidates that you think will make good healthcare providers in that context. So I think starting with the end in mind has sort of emerged as a best practice for a number of our dental schools, and I think it translates across health professions very nicely.
So let's get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts, if you will. So how do institutions do this? What kinds of admissions practices kind of help institutions move towards holistic? I mean, what does the optimal review process look like?
So I always start, so I would say, okay, start with mission, and in a second step, I would say start with your data, right? It's looking at what you have done over time and what it's yielded. Okay, so in 2014, we did recruitment at 5 schools, schools with high enrollment. Let's just say diversity is your goal. 5 schools with high enrollment of historically underrepresented students, right? We did outreach. It yielded this many applications. Here were the grades and GREs and the scores associated with those students. Here's the non-cognitives, and here's what it yielded. We were able to accept them. We were able to interview how many. It's really taken a deep dive in your data. And so that's 1 year, but how did that look over time? How has it changed? And observing those changes and observing what practices you've had into place. And then it is saying, okay, here is where we want to go. What are some variables that we might have asked, we might have yielded a different class if we had just, and you need to fill in the blank. And so that is, I would say, second to mission, learning from your own data is probably the most powerful thing that you can do. We talked a lot with the folks at UC Davis about learning from their own practices. They had one admissions process several years ago. They changed it, and then they are forming a task force to look at it again. I think that's very wise, looking at how your institution may have changed over time. And I'll get to this in a few minutes, but the Fisher 2 decision, it really underscores the importance of evaluating your practices, not just once, but really having a continuing process for monitoring and evaluating what an admissions process is doing.
Okay.
So that's one thing. I would say the other last thing I would say is quantifying the value of your non-cognitives, right? So that sounds kind of counterintuitive, right? You've got numbers that tell you what you want to know about a student's academic index, but how about all those other things? And I think there are some very good tools. I would definitely recommend the Big Test by William Sedlicek, which has great tools and strategies for looking at non-cognitives. One of the things that AAMC is instituted and shares with its members is a worksheet on the strength of evidence. It's called the Strength of Evidence Scale. And it really looks at some of those things that I talked about a second ago, which is if you are volunteering, all right, so 100 hours, is that better than 75 hours? Is that better than 25 hours? And how in balance with a student that may have had to work more, how valuable is that? And it really is, it's also the quality of those experiences and assigning weight and value to those, and having schools really wrestle with that before their committee even starts looking at its first applicant.
Okay.
Now, one more thing.
Sure.
I thought of my last thing. My last thing is sort of training and orientation for the committee, making sure that everybody is on the same page at the outset. That has been a critical part of what's worked in many of our schools, having really setting forth what a committee is trying to do in a given year, and really having some training on some of those components that a committee thinks are most valuable. This year we're going to include a segment on unconscious bias for our admissions folks, and we want to make sure that that our committee members know and our member institutions know the role that bias can play in interviews and really in all aspects of the admissions process.
Okay, great. Before we get back to some of the questions that that we have here, we do have a question from the field.
Sure.
And the question is, can you see in the future all professional schools taking on holistic admissions? And what are 3 key benefits about a holistic approach?
So absolutely, this I don't want to call it a movement, but this this body of work is really, it's picking up steam here in Washington, and I think in our member institutions, the ripples will be felt very soon. So we were asked to do some talks at the Association of Colleges of Pharmacy meeting this fall, and we have some of our admissions trainers that are going to offer that training. In terms of benefits, I think the common thread is that all of our institutions are trying to provide quality educational experiences for all students. They're trying to improve quality health care, whether that's for patients, for human patients, and for animals. We're trying to make sure that the workforce that we develop is credible with communities, all communities, that there's greater language concordance and satisfaction. All of those things are core elements of all of the work that we do, and to the extent that we can put in place tools to make sure that the workforce that we are recruiting into the professions is able, frankly, to carry out those missions, I think it'll be better for all of our professions.
Sure. I think that it's also really important to note that I think while health professions in general have kind of led the charge into holistic approaches to evaluating applicants, certainly we're not the only ones. Most of the cases, I mean, the Grutter and Gratz, I mean, the Gratz case in 2003 was a law school case. The law schools have really been looking at this issue. And certainly social work, the sociology profession in general kind of have really done a lot in this, as well as some of the other STEM disciplines have really started looking at how do we make sure that we have the type of workforce that we want for the future. And it is about raising the overall quality by way of diversity as one element of quality. And so the literature is certainly much broader than just health professions.
Absolutely. I was able to attend a briefing earlier this week on the Fisher 2 case, and it was hosted by the Association of the American Educational Research Association, ADRA. And one of my takeaways was sound science informs good policy. And they talked a lot about the strength of the Fisher 2 case, and all of the amicus briefs that were presented really had a strong basis in the social sciences, and that was across professional fields. They talked about the benefits of cross-racial interactions and being able to address racial isolation, for example. And I think for all of us, the next charge post these legal decisions will be to figure out how we add to the science about what's happening in our professional programs, and how access to care and other key things, health equity, is addressed through some of the work that we do, through having students have, frankly, positive experiences um, in our education programs.
Great. So, Kim, tell us on the ground, what are your schools doing? Are we talking, I mean, a lot of times we hear schools have automated components
Mhm.
of their review of applicants. So, for instance, you take in those quantitative metrics, you look for a
Mhm.
Z-score based on something, and you have a cutoff, and then that next group goes to further evaluation, either like file review or they automatically get offered interviews. So, in terms of kind of what happens in the room, are there cutoffs? What happens?
So what happens is probably the great mystery, right? But
Right. Tell
what
us your
actually
secrets.
happens, what actually happens. However, I will say that I will tell you what we advocate for. We advocate for um, a real whole file review without cutoffs. Now, with that said, I also would say that schools are looking very closely at the students that they enroll and their ability to be successful, and looking at their own data. So, for example, there are schools who have been wildly successful in getting a broad range of students in dental school, through dental school, very happily, successfully, with a broad range of metrics and um, non-cognitives, right? What's made them successful is probably a lot of um, ingredients within the school that contributed to that success. So I guess I'm trying to say in sort of a very um, not PC way, but sort of guarded way, that really you have to look comprehensively at what your schools can provide to a range of students. If you don't have any support services, and don't have that much of a diverse faculty, and you don't have a lot of the infrastructure uh, to meet the needs of the students where they are, then you might have to develop a scale um, that can support the students that you want to enroll. So those things have to be congruous. They cannot be incongruent. Um, and yeah, I would say that the challenge in the nuts and bolts of it is making sure that your school can meet the students where they are. If you take that as the driver, then I think the policy that you have as an outgrowth will be stronger.
So, Kim, what does the applicant pool for the average dental school look like? So, for example, how many applicants would a school committee have to review in any given year? Is
Okay.
it, yeah,
If
so
it,
that
if
folks know that, so that folks kind of get a sense of if you're talking about kind of full file review,
Yeah.
how many files are they
Yeah.
reviewing?
So just a typical number.
Yeah.
Our class size is about 80. A school may have about 1,200 applicants
Okay.
for those 80 slots.
Okay.
How does that? I don't know how that
Yeah, for some of our
matches.
schools, for some schools, that's pretty comparable in veterinary medicine, and even maybe a little bit on the high end. But our average class size nationally is about 95, and the range of applicants to seats at an individual institution may range from 500 to 12,
Okay.
1300.
All right.
So
And there are schools with many more than
absolutely,
1,200. Yes.
sure.
But yeah, in terms of what kind of staffing and resource it takes, I mean, it's a labor-intensive process, and I think our schools are being creative with the resources that they have. Some probably, I won't say that all, but I know that 43 of them said that they're doing robust holistic reviews. So some may still have cutoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And we encourage them to just keep pushing the envelope toward looking at, okay, if students between, let's say, I'm just going to be arbitrary, a 3.3 GPA in science and a 3.5. If those students are getting into dental school somewhere, then what might you be missing out on if your cutoff is a 3.5, for example, right? So it's really looking inside your numbers and figuring out, okay, is this what we need to do to recruit the class that we want?
Sure. This is an issue for me that I look at with my institutional research hat on. When I look at our applicant pool, certainly nationally we have a ratio that we would certainly like to change. Our ratio right now is about 1.6 applicants for every one seat, right? So it's not 1-to-1 yet, but when we look at the metrics, when we look at some of the quantitative metrics for that pool, we see that less than, it's about 18% nationally have a GPA that is a 2.9 or lower.
Right.
Right. And so, we have 80% of our pool that is 3.0 or above. That's a pretty deep pool, right?
Yes.
And especially since we do have some schools where they don't have a GPA cutoff until about 2.8, 2.9. Now, what's the difference between a 2.8, 2.9 and a 3.5? There may be a lot of difference, and actually, in the grand scheme of things, when you take into account non-cognitives, they both may be able to handle the technical work, but one may have additional non-cognitive strengths that the other does not.
Correct.
Yeah. So there's a lot of variability, and I've argued that despite the fact that our pool is not as deep as we would like academically on the academic metrics, it's actually probably deeper than we would expect it to be with those numbers. So you said that you have a group of schools, I guess it was 40 some schools, that say that they're practicing robust holistic admissions, which means that the other 60% are kind of moving in that way. And as with anything in education, we are looking at continuous improvement, right? Yeah. So what are some of the things that schools can do to move closer to holistic admissions practices, recognizing that these changes will likely happen incrementally?
Yeah, I agree. I would say that the biggest shift that probably has to occur in the schools that are not there yet are looking at the non-cognitives at the initial screening process. It's very hard to do the full file review of 12,000 applicants with just a few folks looking at the apps at the outset, right? It is a challenge. They need to recruit more volunteers, frankly, to be parts of admissions committees in order to get that done. So I would say the first thing is trying to shift that practice. And really what that means in our community is trying to shine a light on what is possible. I can't underscore enough how important it has been to have these conversations at our national meetings, to share with peer leaders. We have a section within our organization that focuses on admissions and student affairs issues, and having that body be able to wrestle with the details has been great. And it's also been great to feature schools that have been at this work for a while and show them what is possible. We've been pleased to see that some schools are wrestling with different models for how to do some of the work. Some schools are engaged in multiple mini interviews. Some schools to try to kind of look at a broader number of variables and how students may perform under different conditions. One school I know is trying to do interviews, video interviewing. So I think there is movement. I think showcasing some examples of what's possible is helpful. One thing that we're trying to get schools that may still be struggling a little bit is maybe thinking about just simple things like when they are considering candidates for interview. So what we found is a lot of our candidates of color are applying later in the process, right? If we have an admissions season that begins, say, in the summer of 2016 and closes in December, if students are waiting until much later in the process, they're not getting the benefit of early looks and early consideration. So we're trying to both get students to apply early. Certainly that would be a great fix, but also getting our schools to kind of change when and how they look at candidates. So sometimes it's the more subtle and small tweaks that have the potential to have good impacts.
Sure. So another big question I think that folks probably are asking is how, when we're talking about human resources in terms of full file review, so we need more volunteers, but just managing that, have schools found that it's just more costly to do holistic evaluation?
We've not, it's a great question. We have not asked that of schools. And even if we had asked it, I don't know if I would share it broadly. But I think we've had tremendous support from our leadership. And when I say leadership, I mean school leaders at the highest level for this work. We have been offering this workshop initially at no cost to our schools, just because we weren't sure how much interest there would be. We wanted to reduce barriers to being able to take advantage of it. And now now that we've said that schools should pick up the cost of having trainers come, we have not lost a step. We are really excited that schools still want the training. So yes, my inclination would be that there's certainly an increased cost, and I have seen a resolute commitment of our leaders to do what it takes, and that is if we can keep providing them with good information about the impact that holistic review is having.
Sure, data drives it.
Data drives it. You're the data lady. Yes, data does drive it, and further underscored, I think that the outcome of the Fisher case and some of the language in the actual decision does well in supporting this case. I think I printed out one.
Yeah. So those schools, the Fisher case is great to talk about and transition for our last few minutes. So what about the recent Fisher case that decision came down last week, so what are some of those recommendations, and what is the for schools that are really kind of worried about the legalities around this, what did the Fisher case say? Again, they kind of doubled down on previous
Yeah.
findings.
So, first of all, I consider it to be a victory for diversity and for affirmative action in higher education, and certainly in our professional realm. The implications of a case in an undergraduate school certainly has ramifications for all of the work that we do and the discussion we're having today. So in the Fisher case, the University of Texas, Austin um, had in place already for its admissions a 10% plan in which the top 10% of graduating high school seniors were granted admission. That filled about 75% of its seats. The remaining 25% were filled, the freshman class were filled um, with an admissions consideration that included both an academic index and a personal achievement index. So the academic index included SAT scores and high school performance, and the personal achievement index included a variety of factors, and race was one factor among many. So I don't know how clear it is in the court of public opinion, but race was a factor within a factor within a factor. To use a quote by Ted Shaw, who's a former head of the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP. So it was used in a very narrowly tailored way. So that's the first point that I think should be underscored. UT did a very rigorous examination of their policy. Because of a state statute, they were not able to use race they had to use it in a very narrowly tailored way. So the top 10% plan was a way that they thought they could achieve diversity across the state, because schools in Texas were, for lack of a better word, sort of segregated. So the top 10% of a predominantly black school and the top 10% of a predominantly white school, okay, you sort of get some diversity. And they found that they still couldn't achieve that. So they used race in a very small way in this case, and that's what Abigail Fisher was challenging. So I guess what I want to say about this in relationship to holistic review is that figuring out ways for schools to very carefully look at how they are achieving their diversity standards, which I think is a core tenet of holistic review. It is one factor among many. We talked about a balanced review of the experiences, the attributes, and metrics of schools. We also would like to, the court challenges all of us to engage in ongoing, constant deliberation and reflection of our admissions policies, and to give it constant looks, to monitor it. And I think the way that we've talked about holistic review, which is looking at your data, looking at what you're trying to achieve, basing it in your mission, developing your practices after that, and then looking at them again, and not stopping at, oh, we had a good year in 2016, but saying, okay, what has changed perhaps in our state? Are we still meeting our mandate? It's looking at the institutional context, but then the context that surrounds it, perhaps. Perhaps there are demographic shifts that need to be taken into consideration. I think holistic review is a strong tool and really aligns quite nicely with some of the language in the Fisher decision.
Great. So we are about to wrap up, Kim. Any parting words for your veterinary friends here?
Yeah, so I would I'll close with something I shared with the folks at UC Davis. So I have a 9-year-old daughter who right now wants to be a soccer player, and I'm trying actively to change that. Uh, but what I told the folks at UC Davis is that her pediatrician is an African American woman, her dentist is an African American woman, and the veterinarian that we have for our newly adopted cats is an African American woman. And it matters. It matters that these three healthcare providers who live in our community, who practice in our community, are visible role models for kids like my daughter. It matters that they are committed to high quality care within a community of color. And it matters that she's able to see folks that look like her engaging in professions that help others. So we talked a lot about holistic review as a tool, but I hope that the folks that listen in sort of can hold at the same time the ultimate work that we are all engaged in, which is a commitment to equitable health care and to a workforce that can help all of us achieve that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. That was great. For folks that are still listening or listening online, please know that part 2 of this discussion will take place next week with Drs. Linda Lord, Jackie Pelzer, and Jenny Hodgson from the Ohio State University's School of Veterinary Medicine and Virginia Maryland's College of Veterinary Medicine. And so those institutions will be talking a bit about what they've done to move closer to holistic admissions in the last few years. So thank you so much for joining us. You can listen to the audio version of the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or your favorite podcast app. You can also be sure to like our Facebook page, Diversity and Inclusion on Air. We are on Facebook, and we'll be posting some of the show notes there, as well as the archived version of this video. So thank you so much, Kim, for joining us. I look forward to being building mates in just a couple of months, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you, Lisa. It was my pleasure to join you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.